I'm the Secretary Treasurer for the AMS Pedagogy Study Group, and I wanted to just give a quick little announcement for those of you who are here for this session we have planned but may not be able to stay for the business meeting afterwards, that we do have the email list on the back chair there. If you are new to the AMS PSG, would like to be a part of the study group, I'd encourage you to add your name, add your email address. If you have recently changed your email address, please double check and fill in a new email address if you have changed it recently. Also, we are soliciting members for our programming committee for the Teaching Music History Conference, as well as for sessions that we will be sponsoring in Vancouver. If you would like to be involved with the AMS PSG programming committee, please indicate that on the email list on the back. And I will no longer pretend to be Jim Briscoe, and we will be able to move on.
Thank you very much. Yes, I am Kevin Burke, and it's true, I've lost quite a bit of weight, but these things happen sometimes. We will follow this procedure for our discussion this evening. The topic, as you see it here, is teaching writing in the music history classroom. It's wonderful that we have this group, honestly. There have been days when we didn't have it for about 75 years of the Society's life. And it is wonderful. Matthew Valenzuela has taken this topic up, and I won't dwell on it, but it's good to see that our society has come around to music history pedagogy as a concentrated research issue for the society. We welcome you very warmly, and those of you who are at the back, there are rather a few chairs up at the front. And if you'd like to come up, that's just great. The order for tonight's work will be as follows. We're going to hear, first of all, from the panel with short talks each. John Spilker is talking about undergraduate music history, the micro level of classroom concerns. Jeffrey Wright is again talking about undergraduate ideas at the macro level of design and topics. Everett Smith is talking about graduate music history, graduate musicology at the micro level, and Colin Roust is talking about grad level concerns at the macro level of our discourse. Now, the presentations will each last about 15 minutes, and I will introduce each with the biography of the speaker. We'll thereupon go to a break, to small groups, based upon each of these areas of interest, and you can pick and choose which speaker you want to groupie around and gather your thoughts together, and many will come to the fore. I'll visit around, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, and I will see what your emphases are in each group. We'll conclude then with an open mic for you to express your interests and your ideas and interpretations, and someone on the panel then will respond to what you've said. Let's go right ahead then. John Spilker holds a PhD in musicology from the Florida State University and is assistant professor of music at Nebraska Wesleyan University, where also he serves as coordinator for the Campus Assessment Academy project, sponsored by the Higher Learning Commission. In 2014, he received the Nebraska Wesleyan University Exemplary Teacher Award. At the 2016 national meeting of the Association of American Colleges and Universities, Dr. Spilker will present his work on music history curricular revision and integration with Nebraska Wesleyan's new liberal education program. His research on dissonant counterpoint and Henry Cowell has been published in American Music and the Journal for the Society for American Music. Professor Spilker's talk this evening is on critique and revision, engaging students in thinking differently about writing. John?
Good evening. I'd like to begin by saying that by standing up and sharing some of my ideas, I in no way profess to be perfect or even an expert in teaching writing or doing writing, but striving to do my very best and to collaborate with colleagues in helping my students to do their best. There is a handout if you have that, or if you haven't, we have a session monitor who can assist you with that. I want to begin by talking about my collaborative process. I've worked with musicology and ethnomusicology colleagues at a variety of other institutions, several of which are kindly in the audience today. I've worked with colleagues at Nebraska Wesleyan University in the English, history, and religion departments, colleagues there that teach with me in the first semester seminar, and colleagues there that I've worked with on curricular revision. As well, my students, those who have taken my classes, I'm always collaborating with, and especially the students who have become advanced level co-instructors after they've taken the course. They've co-instructed with me when I've taught the course again, and that always helps me refine some of my processes and ideas. I got a lot of ideas, or the inspiration behind ideas, from panels that I went to at the Association of American Colleges and Universities 2014 national meeting in Washington, D.C. in January. And as part of my work with our Higher Learning Commission assessment project, I drew a ton of inspiration from an oldie but goodie, Robert Barr and John Tagg's article, From Teaching to Learning, a New Paradigm for Undergraduate Education. A little bit of background about my institution. We're a primarily residential, primarily undergraduate and liberal arts institution. We have approximately 1,500 total undergraduate students in that section of our campus that I teach in. Primarily our students come from small Nebraska towns. Some come from Lincoln and Omaha, and a small handful are recruited from outside Nebraska. Their incoming reading and research skills are varied but lacking. So I don't have fantasy liberal arts students that I'm working with who they have a variety of strengths and challenges that they come in with. To address that as an institution, all students must take a first semester seminar where, through the topic of the instructor's choice, they learn skills in critical thinking, reading, writing a research paper driven by an argument, and research skills. And as well, they all have to take what are called first-year writing courses, one in the fall and one in the spring. Some background as well on my music history courses that I'm doing this teaching of writing in. I teach 2 4-credit-hour topic-based music history courses. In the fall, it's music history, gender, and sexuality. In the spring, it's music history, the environment. I redesigned my required music history courses to integrate with our liberal education, and each one is part of a cohort of classes that feature classes from multiple disciplines organized around a single topic. The work that I do in these 2 4-credit-hour music history classes builds on the second semester of their sophomore year. They take a 3-credit-hour world music course with me. And the primary research project in there engages both library sources, but more prominently, 20 to 25 hours of fieldwork on some sort of local music culture in Lincoln or the surrounding area. My music history courses, these 2 4-credit hour ones, are upper level writing instructive. This integrates with a requirement in the liberal education that there be skill instruction across the curriculum and those that have this designation of being writing instructive. In my music history courses, they're organized around case studies that center upon a musical work. On one class period, we will discuss background on the historical period and the genre. And then we will do stylistic analysis in the next class period, looking at a specific music work as representative of that genre. And then in the third class period, we'll discuss a scholarly article that is pertinent to that sort of 3-class period case study. As well, my courses have a research instructive approach. The case studies are intentionally designed to develop research skills that they'll need in writing their paper. And to write their paper, I have multiple staged assignments that culminate in an argument-based research paper. To give you a sense of those staged research assignments, the first thing I have them do I refer to as an article abstract. It's 3 to 4 pages, and they summarize a source. It's the first article that we have to read together as a class. And this gives them a sense of how do I engage with a source? How do I situate a source? And I remind them that this habit, this skill will come back repeatedly so that you're not turning into me a paper that is a pastiche of quotes from a variety of sources. Also with the article abstract assignment, we engage writing structure in a small scale assignment. Their next step is what I call a research report. It has their working thesis that has to have some sort of an argument or a claim. I then want them to give me 1 to 2 thoroughly polished sentences for each main point that supports that thesis. And I point out to them this is a basic outline. In order to construct these sentences, you've got to know what are my main points and how do they support the thesis. And the final component of the research report is an annotated bibliography. I think it's 5 sources, and they have to know they're going to use these 5 sources. I said, you've likely consulted a lot, but I want these to be 5 sources where you know you're going to use them. And I don't want an overview of the source in the annotation. I want you to summarize key pieces of information that you're gleaning as a part of your process. The next step is revised thesis, detailed outline, and then I say, pick one of those main points that you feel most comfortable with now and write it up. Again, focusing on writing structure on a small scale level of the paper and reinforcing for them that the construction of a paper is similar to the construction of a fugue. The final steps are a complete paper of 10 to 12 pages, and then a final revised paper. So I use multiple approaches to try to engage my students in the act of critique and revision. And those are, I give them a tips for critiquing writing document. We have in-class workshops. Assignment submission, so when I say turn in your abstract assignment, any assignment submission includes multiple drafts that are turned in. My students have an optional reflect and apply assignment after they receive their feedback from me. And then I also give them a tips for studying assigned articles to be reinforcing this. So to dive into the tips for critiquing writing document, it's on pages 1 and 2 of your handout. If you want to look at it later for a resource, or email me about the glaring oversights and typos. The main point in this document is I want to give them suggestions for interrogating written work. They're really stuck in a mindset very often from high school of, I'm just a proofreader. And so I'm going to get catty with you about how you're using commas. and pointing out where there are grammatical errors. And I tell them, I want you to move way beyond that. I want you to interrogate this, and here are some guiding principles and some ideas. I remind my students that there's no one right way to do this. I'm just giving you some. But I want you to think differently about writing, and I usually put up like Apple's logo from the 80s with the colored apple that says think different. It's a beautiful world when we think different. And I remind my students that writing is a continual process, because I think some of them have come from high school feeling like I have these multiple assignments in a class, but there's no connection, there's no continual process. I get it done and it's over with. And then I tell them that in that process, revision is key. When it comes to our first in-class workshop, prior to coming to class, they've studied the tips for critiquing writing document. And we critique anonymous intro paragraphs that I've taken from previous classes. I have them look at it, and then I ask them, what are the strengths, challenges, and questions that you have? We have a big discussion. We talk about potential solutions. I point out some things after I've given them an opportunity to do that, and I let them ask me questions about what I'm seeing and why I'm seeing it. Then we use a rubric from my class that I will use to one day grade some of their work. And we use this rubric to evaluate these anonymous samples. Again, for your reference, if you're like, what do this guy's rubrics look like? On page 3 of your handout, I have an evaluation rubric for the abstract assignment. And I passed that out to everyone, and I said, so looking at this intro paragraph, how would we score the thesis statement? And for each criteria, this allows them a space where we have to decide, why have we selected the given score based on everything that we've said about these passages? Why select the given score? And I am surprised to find that very often there are similar evaluations from me and the students. We see eye to eye on these anonymous examples. And I smile because we then don't see eye to eye when it's their own work sometimes. Right? But what's great is this also gives them opportunity to ask me tons of questions. I was like, I want you ask what's unclear. What about the decision that I made puzzles you? Or what do you want to know about why I might have made that decision? Futuring class workshops. They focus on one assignment in that staged process that I showed you, just one assignment. It happens approximately 7 days before the final assignment is due. And there are multiple brief guided activities where I've given them some sort of something to do in a one-to-one peer critique of the work that they've brought. They always bring a complete version of whatever that assignment is. They do these multiple different activities, and then I save a substantial amount of time to come back and have a large group discussion where I tell them, share what was a part of your process, give us observations, ask questions, talk about problems. So they both have a sort of peer one-to-one and then a large group discussion. As I mentioned earlier, when an assignment's due, I expect to see 3 versions. The final version, which I grade using the rubric that they've seen, a peer critiqued version, and a self-critique. These are helpful because it helps me see what kind of critiquing work are they doing, what kind of observations can I make, but I don't grade their peer critique or their self-critique. It's to get them engaged in that process. And I tell them, hey, I get it, self-critique is hard. It's going to be easier to do a peer critique. So if you need help on your first couple self-critiques, go to our campus writing center if needed and have them help you with that. The optional reflect and apply assignments. After students receive graded the rubric and feedback, they can earn up to 1 letter grade back on the assignment. This is connected with a lot with those presentations at the AAC national meeting, where we want to connect and structure feedback with student improvement. The idea of using reflection to aid in the writing and revision process. Again, for you to look at in the future, I've put 2 different reflect and apply assignments that the students need to complete. They do it electronically, so the spacing is not an issue. But what they need to do is study the graded feedback, look at the rubric, and address what needs to be fixed. In the first assignment, I've pointed out some problematic passages. But in the next assignments, they need to show me where the problematic passages are, why they're problematic, and how they would go about fixing them. I then have them redo the introduction or redo some small part of the assignment so they can apply this reflection. And then I ask them, what are you going to change about your process and retain about your process moving forward? And then my tips for studying an article. That's also page 6 of your handout. I'm happy to share. I just want them to not read. I want them to study. I want them to use and discover the organization that the writer has put down there. Use that organization to then learn the content. I want them to focus on how the author chose to structure the argument. Be able to answer questions about the author's research process and methods, what their evidence is and how they use it, because this is what they're going to do when they're writing their research papers. And I think the benefits that I've seen so far, they definitely were working together to identify tools for critique and develop them through lots of practicing. Music students know about practicing. They focus on process through staged assignments and multiple drafts. They connect instructor feedback with student identifying the issues and then making plans for improvement. And then they identify and reinforce components of the writing and research process as we're reading each article in all of the case studies that we look at. Those are my beginning remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Jeffrey Wright is an assistant professor of music history at Indiana University, South Bend, where he teaches courses in Western classical music, popular music, music theory, and gender studies. He is also active in the university's Center for Excellence in Teaching, where he's given workshops on technology in the classroom, the first-year experience, and structuring online classes. In addition to his teaching, Jeff served as chair of the music department from 2012 to 2015 and led the program through the accreditation process, time-consuming enough, resulting in IU South Bend's admittance into the National Association of Schools of Music. Jeff is here to speak with us on the topic of writing across the sequence, applying curriculum mapping techniques in the music history sequence. Jeff Wright.
Good evening, everyone. I want to say thank you for taking the time out of your Friday evenings to come listen to some people speak about pedagogy. It's very encouraging to see such a large crowd. I want to begin my presentation talking a little bit about my experiences and influences that have kind of led me to this, as Dr. Briscoe said, macro view of teaching writing in the music history sequence. A lot of my assignments that I'll end up talking about, I've actually consulted with John Spilker about, and I just kind of took it to the next level in my view of how can I apply these to my institution. That's me. So like John, I want to provide you with a little bit of a background about my institution because I think it frames the model that I'm going to present to you today. So I teach at a regional campus in the IU system. It is primarily commuter, primarily undergraduate, and being a regional campus, our main mission is to serve every student in our region as defined by Indiana University, which for us are the cities of South Bend, Mishawaka, Elkhart, if you're familiar with the north central Indiana area. So 80% of our students come from the region, 93% come from the state of Indiana, and perhaps most concerning, the educational system in South Bend is not tremendous, and I would say a vast majority, I couldn't get the exact statistics because our campus doesn't publish them, but anecdotally, most of our students have to take the pre-college writing, the pre-college math, and a reading review course before they're allowed to take the Gen Ed courses in those sections. My role at IU South Bend has been I'm the sole musicologist in the music department. I still teach a music history sequence. It is not dead at IU South Bend, which is 2 semesters to cover. First semester we cover antiquity to 1750, then 1750 to 1945. Then a composition faculty teaches our contemporary music class, which is music since then. And this year, for the first time, I've started teaching a first-year experience course, which is an introduction to music studies for freshman music majors. But integrated into that are college survival techniques, so study skills, campus resources, kind of a dual-purpose course. And even though I was a junior faculty member, I was made department chair for a 3-year term, and within that, I not only led us through an ASM accreditation for the first time, which any of you who have been involved in that process knows the paperwork there, but we were also up for our 10-year review through the Higher Learning Commission, and the 10-year prior, our only complaint was that we didn't have an assessment plan in place, and wouldn't you know, when I took over as chair, we still didn't have an assessment plan in place. So I had a lot of catch-up to do there. So I came to a bunch of observations in my first few years of teaching music history. One was that I literally got depressed grading my students' papers at the end of every semester. They were never as good as I wanted them to be. I found myself scoring them for the first time, giving them Ds, and trying to find some way to give them Bs to cut down on complaints. And what this made me do was kind of say, all right, what am I doing wrong? Because obviously there's something missing. And it kind of occurred to me that I couldn't teach all of the writing skills that I was evaluating my students on in a 1-semester course and teach music history. It just couldn't be done, and so I was actually being really unfair. I was assessing and evaluating my students on information I didn't cover. I was leaving that to the English professors, which didn't seem to be quite working out. The students couldn't transfer those skills into a course. And this was happening every semester, so it wasn't like, oh, this crop was just ill-prepared. Semester after semester, this happened. Then I become a department chair. And as department chair, I realized that wow, when we talk about assessment, it tends to be at the degree level. What do we want our music majors to learn in 4 years? And how do we show the HLC and ASM that that's what we're doing? And then I took some seminars on instructional analysis, and I tended to do that. It was taught to, you do that at the course level. But then I kind of realized that musicologists are in a really unique position, particularly ones at small schools where they're the sole musicologist. I had the same students in multiple courses for 3 semesters. So what if instead of having them write a massive research paper every semester where I thought they're not writing to the skill I want, is there a way I can structure my 3 classes that I know they're going to take as a block and kind of span that leading up to one major research paper that hopefully was going to be better than the previous 3. And so this is the kind of launching point for the model I want to present today. For those interested in such things, I have 2 main pedagogical influences for this model, Walter Dick and Lou Carey, who advocate for a systems approach to teaching, which we'll see what that looks like. And then Mary Huba and Jane Freed, whose big emphasis is backward design. And for those of you who aren't familiar with backward design, the premise is pretty simple. When designing a curriculum, start with what you want them to get at the end, and then plan backwards what all the hurdles and steps they need to go through are. And then when you deliver the content, you deliver it forward. So I realized that I could do this with my 3-course sequence instead of for the entire music degree. So the Music M202 class is the final class in the survey that I teach. And these are all of my course objectives. The one I'm going to talk about today is My final objective is I want you to write a musicological argument and effectively defend a position in a paper of approximately 3,000 words. Not huge, but this was my end goal. So then I had to think, all right, what do my students need to be able to do before they can even start this process? They need to be able to identify appropriate scholarly sources. They need to be able to evaluate these sources and scholarly arguments. In order to do that, they need to be able to list and define the elements of an academic argument, and finally demonstrate proper grammar and the principles of good writing. So a systems approach model to teaching says, put this all in a chart so you can kind of see how does all of this fit together. And you have my instructional analysis chart on your handout. It's also reproduced up here. And overall, this is a somewhat logical progression. Writing skills kind of covers almost all of it. But in terms of identifying resources, I thought even further about it. What does that actually mean? So I made sure I wanted my students to know the Library of Congress classification system for music sources. I wanted them to know about the various databases available through our library. Components of an academic argument. I wanted them to know the difference between a topic, a research question, and a claim or thesis. Reasons, evidence, kind of the craft of research model, basically. And then once they knew these, they could use those to evaluate academic arguments, and this whole time I'm developing writing skills with the students. So then my question became, when in my sequence do I teach these various things? And so I mapped these skills. So as you can see on the slide, in an example 2 in your handout, I have my 3 courses, those 4 sub-goals, and a common curriculum mapping technique says you can't do everything in one semester and expect a student to master something. So kind of the standard model is introducing an idea, reinforcing the idea, and then you can assess effectively a student as to whether they comprehend that idea. So in my first year seminar class, I introduce everything. I do this through library instruction. I have a subject librarian come in. I work with students on identifying resources. We do library scavenger hunt type assignments, but it gets them introduced to the library. We read sections of the latest Turabian manual, which now includes a preface by the craft of research authors. So I have them read through what they say is research, what they say elements of an argument are. And then we read and discuss several texts so that we can start applying these to musicological arguments. And to evaluate that, I do that primarily through reading response assignments. So if you look at example 3 in your handout, I've included a sample prompt. In fact, my students have this due on Monday, where I have them read a section from Mark Katz's Capturing Sound, and in 1 to 2 pages, respond to one of the prompts that I have listed. This is a very low stakes writing assignment, and in my evaluation of it, I do a great deal of critique of their writing, but not in a way that affects their grade. I basically grade this on the good faith effort model, so that their immediate reaction isn't, oh, when I write something for Dr. Wright, my grade plummets. Instead, I say, these are the things that I want you to improve for your next paper, but this was a good job. You had smart ideas, and only when the writing is so bad that it doesn't convey those ideas do I start deducting points. Then to reinforce the ideas of an argument, I have them construct an outline for a research project that they don't need to write up. So again, they have to identify sources. They have to say, this would be my topic. This is example 4 in your handout. The craft of research topic sentence, a research question, what they think their claim would be, what they think their evidence would be, what they think the reasons would be. And again, it's a good faith effort assignment, because I realize, and I teach them when it's over, sometimes halfway through your research project, your claim is wrong. But unlike those of us that are publishing, where we go, well, I guess I have to move my deadline. Or the syllabus doesn't change, and I say, that's okay. That's the process of research. Then in the early music class, I reinforce many of the ideas that they've just had in the first year experience. So again, I do this through an in-class discussion of various texts. I review the library materials, particularly for students that sometimes slip through the cracks and don't take the first year seminar. They became music majors later, what have you. We begin reading The Elements of Style by Strunk and White and engaging in, well, what does good writing actually look like and sound like? And I introduce the idea of peer review. And then for evaluation in this course, as you'll see in example 5, I have them write a performance practice paper. So I make the students choose a piece of music written before 1680 and say, you're going to prepare this for performance in front of the class, and your paper is about how am I playing this or performing this differently than it would have been performed in its original context, and why am I making the decisions I'm making. As you can see there, I give several guiding questions, and I don't put it in terms of an academic argument, though by the time they're done I can say, you were arguing, you were justifying your performance decisions. So on one level, this doesn't force them to engage as deeply with a music repertory they tend not to know as well, and it also ties research into performance. And then finally, in the last class in the sequence, a lot of kind of hardcore evaluation, more in-class discussion of texts, an essay critique similar to the abstract assignment Dr. Spilker talked about, more frequent peer review, all leading up to the argument-driven paper, the rubric for which I include as the last example in your handout. And so what are the benefits that I've seen to this model? One, it takes students a longer time to master writing than we ever give them credit for. None of us mastered writing in a semester. They're not going to master writing in a semester. Why was I trying to force this? Two, it ensured to me that I was teaching everything in a logical order, and that I was only assessing things I had actually taught to my students. But perhaps most importantly was, I could borrow content time from 3 different classes to teach writing, so I wasn't basically having to cut out the entire Renaissance to teach students how to write. You just borrowed from several different classes. And I have found so far, this is relatively early in its process, quality has gone up among students and they feel much more comfortable in the writing process by the time they get to this last class. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jeff. Everett Smith is an instructor of music at Southeastern Louisiana University, where he teaches applied oboe, music history, and music education. He has presented his research at the annual meetings of the Society for American Music, the American Comparative Literature Association, and the Music and Moving Image Conference. In addition to his teaching at Southeastern, he is a board member of the Tangibaho Parish Charter School District and serves as the chair of public relations for the Society for American Music. Everett is going to be speaking with us tonight on formulating and revising a thesis statement that is focused on both writing and sources. Everett?
Good evening. So just a little bit of background about my institution. We are a public research university, but it is a regional campus. It's primarily undergraduate, even though for such a large... we do have about 15,000 students, but they are majority undergrads, particularly in the music department. They're also a majority commuter students as well. We have, I guess I would say, a more than average set of non-traditional students, many of whom, especially in the Department of Music, have been out teaching for a few years. So this is one of the things with the writing that many of them haven't written for some time. We do have master's degrees in performance and conducting, and we get about 10 to 15 new graduate students a year. So a relatively small graduate program at the school. In general, the writing and research skills are substantially lacking, again, especially at the incoming graduate level. And so that's what I wanted to kind of focus on in this presentation. So just a little background about the courses that I'm focused on with this particular presentation. Two of the kind of main things that we do are the Intro to Graduate Studies or the Research and Bibliography. They're called several different things, but it's kind of a similar class that we see at a lot of graduate institutions. It is research and writing instructive, and it's to prepare students for graduate work in general, but also required thesis. It's one of the things I really love about our institution, in that even though we don't have musicology, music theory, the performance and conducting majors do still have to write a thesis, which sometimes is not the norm at a lot of institutions. The other half of this is going to be music history seminars. For the purposes of this discussion, kind of talking at the micro level about thesis creation, two recent courses I've had a lot of success with have been a film music seminar and then also more recently a 20th century opera course. Both of these have been skill instructive and discussion based rather than kind of lecture based content distributors. So again, the content with these is pretty much from guided discussion and scholarly readings. I've had a lot of success with doing smaller readings, but many of them, and that's one of the things I'll talk about. But also that I use content to develop skills in research and writing. So it seems to be one of the issues. I know Jeff kind of mentioned this a little bit, but that for those especially teaching the survey model, you've got so much content. There's just not really a lot of time to teach writing. So one of the things that I've done that I've had a lot of success with is trying to integrate and really trying to come up with new ways to integrate these writing and research skills into our regular content. So a little bit in terms of articles, the Intro to Grad Studies, we typically do about 2 to 3 scholarly articles a week. Again, not the 300-page articles that many of you may have had to have read in courses like this, but my kind of idea is to have multiple instances for them to go through these. And then with the music history seminars, again, 1 to 2 articles per week. That's paired with the content of whatever the seminar topic is. So class readings. 2 of the things that I do to kind of integrate writing research skills are those class readings and then also integrating them with the actual course content, the musical works. So class readings, again, typically journal articles, mostly secondary sources. Every now and then we'll have maybe a newspaper article or something a little more primary than that, but generally journal articles. And then also, with musical works, we'll look at the individual films or operas being discussed for that day in these 2 classes to kind of talk about some of those writing instructions. So the first thing, locating thesis statements in class readings. This again is kind of my intro into looking for ways to utilize content to kind of teach these skills and to practice these skills, really. One of the things that we'll do with every article in all of these classes is the first thing we do before we read any of it is to locate the thesis statement in each of these readings. We kind of pull that out, see what it is, and kind of look to see what we can glean about the article before we've moved on from that. One of the things that we do is critique it for clarity, for precision, and for word choice. I ask the students, is there a better way to write this thesis? Is there a way to make it more clear or succinct? And can we discern from the text or postulate from kind of from what the author is saying, what the research methodologies may come about that we'll see? This has been really beneficial for a couple of reasons. One, they're kind of getting to, as we're learning research methodologies, they're getting to either see a author telling you, I'll be using this archive, I'll be using these methodologies, etc., or to use their own information that they've learned to try to figure out if they can find what methodologies they might be using or what maybe methodologies they would use if they were doing this topic. So again, it kind of gets them into a lot more open mindset. And then also one of the things I found really beneficial was, can we form a dissenting thesis? I'll talk a little bit more about this, but I found this to be really beneficial in that they really have to break this thing down and understand what's going on to be able to form a dissenting thesis. So some of the outcomes with these class readings and kind of pulling thesis statements from them. One of the things that this does is assess student understanding of thesis construction. Again, I'm going through multiple articles, pulling multiple theses, so they get kind of a higher number of theses that they're getting to look at. And it also allows them to closely examine these scholarly theses. It allows you, instead of saying, well, this is how a thesis statement's supposed to be written, it says thesis statements are written very differently across the board by many authors in many disciplines and many subdisciplines, and here's examples of all of those. So it really gives them a pool of theses to look at to help them while they're trying to learn how to write one, and also figure out what a thesis is in one of the articles that they're reading. And then also practice critiquing theses. This has been probably, I think, one of the most beneficial things that I've seen to improving student writing in general. And that kind of moves into the next point here, to move from an expository to argumentative mindset. One of the problems I found, especially with graduate students in performance conducting non-academic, non-musicology, non-theory areas, is that they have real trouble kind of getting out of this expository mindset. And I tell them, I say, you have to have a voice in this. And by them being able to critique these articles, these authors, many of us that they kind of see as the kind of deified authors in the discipline, and we kind of take, we put so much stock in published publications. And so it allows them to kind of remove themselves from thinking that this is some sort of thing that they can't touch, that they can't critique, and let them critique that. It really, I found that it really, again, helps them to be a scholar. It really moves them into kind of more of an argumentative mindset. So one of the other things is with content. So I said with this I'll talk about how I've used this specifically in a film music class and in an opera class. But for each of the musical works we look at, for each film or opera we look at for that day, I have the students bring 2 possible thesis statements to class. So this is it's a very low stakes opportunity to critically evaluate content. And they have repeated low stakes opportunities to practice formulating and creating these theses. So I've had some really great ones, I've had some really terrible ones, but at least they're getting that practice in, and they're kind of engaging with the content for that day. Again, low stakes, these aren't graded, but it does, again, the third point, assess preparation. Did they study the content? Did they watch the film? Have they engaged with whatever the themes are? Do they understand it? What's the comprehension? And any sort of deficiencies. Again, all of these are done without a test or a quiz. I can do them right there in class. And so that's been really great. I've had a lot of success with that. So then one of the things that I do, after we've kind of done this for a little bit in the semester, is do a thesis workshop. So just a brief overview of the process. I do it as a speed dating format where we're kind of shuffling around very quickly, peer critiquing. They do anonymous evaluations and critiquing, and then we return as a group to discuss the findings. So I end up doing a worksheet for this, and what it looks like is we kind of start off reminding ourselves of some of the things that we've looked at. There's sample material. I'll usually include 2 to 3, maybe 4 intro paragraphs from a journal article or someone's abstract. It could be anything. And I have everyone locate and critique the thesis that's in there. The next thing that they'll do is I've given kind of a poorly written expository statement. It could be a paper topic, the history of the trombone or the clarinet or whatever. You've seen these kind of expository paper topics. And I have them kind of turn that into more of a viable argumentative thesis. What can we do to manipulate that topic if you still want to do that topic into some sort of argument? And then we come back as a group to discuss those findings. And then finally, the second thing that we do is we discuss kind of student work in this. This is the second part of the thesis workshop. The students bring 2 possible thesis statements for their research paper for the courses. They're passed around anonymously for peer critique. Again, the dissenting thesis, each student that critiques writes a dissenting thesis for the one that was provided. That's been really beneficial. And then we come back again as a group to discuss that. So we can discuss some of the issues that we've found, any sort of problems and concerns with what they've written. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and as was said, we'll turn back to this in a while and let you have your ideas on it. Colin Roust has taught at the Oberlin Conservatory at Roosevelt University, and currently he is teaching at the University of Kansas. He is the outgoing chair of the AMS Pedagogy Study Group and has given pedagogy presentations at AMS and IMS meetings, as well as at the Teaching Music History Conference, which he's organized for the past 2 years. This evening, Colin is going to be talking with us about teaching writing at the doctoral level. Colin Rouse.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having such a great turnout. This is the biggest Friday evening turnout we've had in PSG that I can remember in recent years. It's wonderful. And I hope, as the chair of the PSG, that you'll be able to stick around for the business meeting. We're going to keep it short and quick, maybe 10 minutes at the end, at the close of this session. We'll go straight into it. We're electing a new chair, so the more people we have, the more voices we have, which would please me greatly. With that, let me dive into talking about teaching writing at the doctoral level. As Jim mentioned, I've taught at 3 very different schools: Oberlin Conservatory, a liberal arts college, in a conservatory environment; Roosevelt University, which is a master's granting urban university in downtown Chicago, again a conservatory environment; and now at a comprehensive school of music in a doctoral, very high research university. So that's kind of my background now on the University of Kansas, that we are a public state university at the mercy of the legislature in many ways, but also a very high research Carnegie top classification in terms of research. It's a large state university. It's 29,000. Largely, most of the students are coming from the Midwest and from Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, Oklahoma, which shapes a lot of the nature and the character of our students in many ways. Within the School of Music, we are a comprehensive school of music, meaning we grant everything from bachelor's to doctorates in education, therapy, performance, history, and theory and composition. And we've been doing this for 120 years there at this point. We have a lot of grad students. We are almost 50% graduate students at this point. We are grossly out of balance, quite frankly, from a musicology perspective. About 260 undergrads, I believe, is the actual number, and 240 master's and doctoral students, which also means that I'm in my second year at KU, and I'm already on 20 master's and doctoral committees, with way too many coming up for graduation next year. I shudder to think of what that's going to be like. So this is some of my reality in terms of writing. I want to take a quick diversion, though, from talking about doctoral work to talk about the undergrads for just a moment, since I mentioned the 260 of them. We have a very aggressive writing center in many ways, in that they're really putting themselves out and getting active. I've had the good fortune this semester to be part of a pilot program they are doing, and I essentially want to talk about this pilot program because it's been wildly successful in my Music History 1 class, and encourage you to talk to your writing centers and create something similar. What it is, it's referred to as the Writing Fellow Program. One of their experienced writing tutors, who is a senior in my case, they're all juniors and seniors, they've all been writing tutors for at least 2 years. They're primarily English majors, in my case English and pre-law. She is embedded in the class as a work study assignment, so she's actually being paid by the Writing Center to do this, and we are working her hard to earn every cent of that. With the director of the Writing Center, I crafted 2 writing assignments that are very similar in thesis topics. The first one deals with the first half of Music History 1, which is world music. The second half deals with medieval music. But beyond that, the general thrust of the assignment is very similar. They have a deadline to turn in a rough draft, which in my class means a polished introduction, an outline, a bibliography. And over the next 3 weeks, they must meet with the writing fellow for at least 30 minutes. I do not actually read the rough drafts closely. I know they submit them. I check off that they've submitted them and they're in full credit if they do it on time. I check it off that they've met with the writing fellow and they get credit for that, and that accounts for half of their writing grade. The writing fellow, those of you who've used writing centers will know this about writing tutors. You're really lucky if you have someone who actually knows anything about music. Mine, as an English major and a pre-law student, knows nothing about music. Everything she knows about music she learned in her ballet classes in elementary school. That's really the extent of it. She doesn't work on detail with them. I have a TA who helps them a little bit with that. What my writing fellow does is she works on introduction, thesis statement, and outline. And I have to say, after reading the first round of papers, they're turning in their next rough drafts on Monday, I have never seen such a strong batch of papers. It's amazing what happens when you have a clear introduction, a strong thesis statement, and a clear outline. It fixes 90% of the problems. So this has been hugely successful. I encourage you to talk to your writing centers, make something like this happen, because it's been, and I'm happy to talk more about it if you want to talk at some time. Anyhow, back to the main paper. Doctoral students and graduate students in general. One of the important things I've had to recognize and I've learned about my students in teaching writing to graduate students is that they're really in a very different place from undergrads. It seems that it would go without saying. When I was teaching at Roosevelt, though, most of my master's students and most of my master's students at KU are straight out of their undergrads. They're 23, 24 years old. My doctoral students, however, range from students straight out of undergrad to one of my favorite students who Grout 2 was her textbook. And she's back now after having retired from a 35-year teaching career. Just finished her master's and defended over the summer and now starting her DMA next year. So the backgrounds are ranging really widely. I have a lot of students who have been out of school for a long time, who have been professionals in a variety of fields, particularly teaching at KU, that we seem to draw those in particular. But they're coming with a lot of baggage because of this too. You know, in the case of someone who had Grout 2 as their textbook, her knowledge and her currency in music literature and music scholarship and even knowing what sources are out there now is simply non-existent in this world. She had never worked with the digital sources before. This was a new experience in research methods, was to actually learn those. When she had taken a research methods course for her first master's, it was all on paper. It was 25 years ago. So this is one part, is that they're working professionals. They bring these very different perspectives, but they also bring very different perspectives about writing. And they bring bad habits very often that have been reinforced over 5, 10, 20, or even 40 years of being out of school. So part of what I do is kind of refining where they are to find how to make it better and to fight against certain bad habits they might have. So this leads us into some of my ideals and the goals I'm trying to get from them. The projects I assign, my goal is to make them significant, that I want the students to find significant topics. This means significant both to them professionally and to find a significant argument to talk about, something that is large enough to warrant a significant study. They should be professional in quality, which does not necessarily mean finished and publishable, but it needs to be the kernel of something that is finished and publishable, or something that can be their thesis. The more mileage they can get out of a paper in my class, the happier I am. So the conference and publication potential, it's something I'm really looking for and pushing and helping them to find. The types of writing I have them do vary considerably within courses. Like you've already heard, the comments on low stakes and high stakes assignments. I'm a big believer in this. Those of you who are my other writing spiel, I teach a music history conference. I'm a big believer in low stakes and high stakes. I want to talk just briefly about one example of a low stakes assignment I've done for a course last spring, which was a period survey for graduate students. Honestly, it was a course that I panicked at when I first saw it. There were 16 students enrolled in the spring during the enrollment period, and 14 of them were internationals. The vast majority from East Asia, and frankly left me very concerned about what kinds of writing we'd be able to do. What I ended up doing was to assign blog assignments. And every week on Wednesday, we read a chapter of the textbook and we discussed it. On Wednesday, we talked about music in the anthology, and they wrote a blog entry about a piece that related to the issues we were talking about. Any piece they wanted. A chance for them to kind of explore their own interests and tastes and tie it into class somehow. And then on Friday, I used those pieces they talked about in class. I selected 3 or 4 of them, and we actually dug in and talked about the things these students had written about. What it made them do was every week for 14 weeks, they wrote at least 250 words or so about music. They were not graded on the quality of writing, it was just the fact that they were writing and doing it regularly. And then that it was integrated in an important way into the course. The quality of writing was much higher than I had feared at the beginning, and this practice of just writing daily, we all know this, right? This is part of what we do to survive as musicologists. This made a huge impact on their writing. John and Jeff in particular talked about teaching the writing process through multi-staged assignments. I do this regularly with my papers. Talk a little more about how I do some of that. Teaching DMA documents. At KU, for DMA documents, the students have a choice of doing either a 60-page DMA thesis or to do a lecture recital in a 30-page DMA document. I have yet to hear of anyone who chose the 60-page option. So they're essentially taking a seminar paper they've written and making it better in many cases and pushing it further. With these, I've had the chance to work on a couple of these. It's been very effective, I think, just to take a paper they've already written, go back, revise it. I'm a huge fan of a book by Wendy Belcher called Writing Your Journal Article in 12 Weeks. Happy to talk about that one later, too, if you're interested. It takes students through looking at their thesis statement. How do you strengthen this? How do you strengthen the introduction? How do you tighten your argument and present better evidence? This can be a way to really efficiently get them through that kind of project, because it's essentially an article-length project. PhD dissertations are still a new one for me. I'm working on that. My first advisees in the room. I will let you know more on that in the future. I would love to hear from you guys advice on doing this. At this point, we're largely working on argument and ideas and building argument. I'm really big on that process of introductions, theses, and arguments. All right, so the last thing I want to say, and then we'll wrap up and turn to kind of small group discussions, is talking about teaching the research and writing process. This echoes what we've already heard from all three, John and Jeff and Everett. Timelines are a big thing. I believe very strongly in figuring out where you want to finish, when do you want to finish, and let's work backwards. What do you have to finish by? If you want to finish your term paper by 2 weeks before the end of the semester, it's a great goal. Now we have to have a rough draft 2 or 3 weeks earlier. We need to have an outline 3 weeks earlier. We need to have an abstract here. This means most of my writing projects start in week 2 of the semester, but it pushes them through the process in a staged, simple way. The staged goals are very important to me because they focus on individual things and individual goals. First, can you find sources? Then can you find an argument? Then can you organize your ideas and identify major points? It's just building step by step. Prose is the very last thing I would have them do. And finally, for collaborative work, what I mean by this primarily is the reality of my scholarly work and my scholarly process is that I have a lot of friends who read everything I write. And they share articles with me, and this is part of how we work as scholars. Students don't often think that way, and I push them to. And one thing I've started to do over the past 3 or 4 years is to actually make time in my graduate courses where we have in-class workshops, like Everett was talking about. What I will often do in these cases is there'll be a deadline to bring in your abstract, for example. And on that deadline, when you have your abstract written, you will sit down in a group of 3 or 4 people, you will read your abstract to them, and they will critique you, and you'll spend 10, 15 minutes working on that abstract to improve it, to improve the arguments. We do the same thing with thesis statement, we do the same thing with outline. We give an entire day's worth of class to this because I think the process is so important. I make it an integral part of the class. And by having them talk about it and collaborate, what's happened in the best cases is that those groups have then gone out of class and read each other's drafts on their own and helped each other. Even in subsequent semesters, I've already seen this happen, which has been fantastic. So anyhow, that brings me to the end of my prepared remarks. So just to get us thinking about process again, reinforce that especially. That's what we've all been talking about in many ways. And so with that, I will turn it back to Jim.
For our plan, then, we'll divide into 4 groups according to your interests. We will ask John Spilker, to take this first quarter of the room in this area. John was speaking with us about critiquing and writing at the undergraduate level. In this back quarter of the room, we'll let Jeff Wright join his group, talking on writing across the sequence, applying curriculum mapping techniques to the music history sequence. In this third of the room, some of you come forth and talk with Everett Smith about formulating and revising a thesis statement that is with both writing and sources in mind. And then behind there, in that back quarter or so of the room, maybe Colin Roust will lead you in discussing teaching writing at the doctoral level, as he just presented. So we'll work for about 20-25 minutes together, formulate questions. I'll kind of circulate and see what's coming to the fore, and then we will come back for comments in a kind of public way. So thank you. Please break up into these 4 sections. Thank you. Thank you very much. Wonderful. Nice work.